What was the biggest risk you have taken?
6 years ago I had a massive heart attack. The ambulance came and it was clear what was happening. They said there was a hospital close by that could try and stabilize me, and there was another hospital 30 minutes away that had a cardiac unit that could do whatever was needed. The risk was that if I went to the one close by they may not be able to do anything. I told them to take me to the one 30 minutes away even though they indicated there was a chance dying while en route. I made it there, and while in the operating room I coded for 4.5 minutes. End up it was a widow-maker heart attack. I woke up 3 days later on a ventilator but made it through it. If I had chosen the local hospital I never would have made it. Threatening my employer with legal action. Edit. I'd just like to say that I don't recommend doing this unless you have an actual reason and a strong case. My now ex-employer threatened to sack me if I didn't came back to work immediately. I was on sick leave with severe depression and anxiety shortly after completing treatment for a rare form of breast cancer at 34. They fucked up. Followed a sketchy homeless man into a dark alley in San Francisco at 2 a.m. I was 15, alone, armed with nothing but a paperback copy of The Light Fantastic. My teachers were asleep, no one knew I'd left our motel, and it was my first time in a city bigger than Copenhagen. I should, by all accounts, be dead. Ended up saving his friend's life by calling 911 and applying what basic first aid I'd been taught. 2009, the world was economically on fire. Layoffs weekly at my job. Toddler and one on the way. Decided to double down everything I owned to buy a house in an area I could not afford under normal circumstances. On the way to the closing I was shitting diamonds. Before we entered the closing, I looked to my wife and said, if I lose my job, we lose everything. House, cars, retirement, all of it. But if we make it, we will do very well. I just sold that house last week. While it was emotional to let it go, we raised 3 kids, made a lot of friends and memories, and was able to make enough profit to wipe out her student loans. When I was 5 and just starting to swim, I decided that the best way to learn was to jump right in. Off the high dive. Not many people can say that their courage peaked at 5. I got accepted to a good university the same day my band was offered a recording contract. There was no way I could do both, so I chose the contract. I look back on those years I spent traveling and playing music for a living as some of the best memories I've ever had, and I did eventually end up with an associate's degree from a local college, but I'll always wonder what could have been different. I moved from the Gold Coast, Australia, to Newcastle almost immediately after I graduated high school. I knew no one there except for the deadbeat now ex I was moving with. Best decision I have ever made. Ex and I broke up. I found my passion working in a coffee roastery, and I met my now husband on a bus. Felt very nervous before a presentation in university, and thought I was going to do quite poorly on it as I hadn't prepared very well for it. I just thought, fuck it, and boldly went up to the lecturer to ask if I could do my presentation first. It paid off and went much better than expected, and I got one of the highest marks in the class on the assignment. Sold my car, packed my things, got on a train, and moved halfway across the country to be with a woman I'd been with in person less than 20 days total. 12 years later, married with a kid. Craziest, stupidest, best decision I've ever made. I voluntarily became homeless to quit paying rent. After 2 months of sleeping in the woods, I was given an old car from a relative unsolicited and lived out of that for 2 years. It was actually pretty comfy once I got my routine down. I have a place now because I need to have somewhere to take care of a family member. Quit my job of 10 years, rented out my fully furnished house to strangers, and then proceeded to backpack around South America for 6 months. I was half convinced I was just going to come back to an empty house. Returned and everything was in place, even the booze we had left behind. I made a couple of bucks renting the place out, and 3 months later got a job making 10% more than the one I left. When I say fully, I mean fully. Not just the furniture, but the dishes, utensils, towels, TVs, etc. Basically removed the laptop, jewelry, guns, and clothing and left everything else. I left my last job due to some health issues. I was expected to return to the same kind of work in December. I refused when I found out they were trying to get me to work in the same building that caused my illness. I knew it was a risk that I could lose the job and benefits. But my health is way more important than working a crummy desk job. It's not just mental health issues, it's physical ailments too. I'm currently on leave without pay while I figure out my next steps. It's scary. I have some medical benefits coming in from the feds, but that will run out eventually. But I have faith things will work out for the best. Life is too short to stay at a job for benefits and a pension. Especially when the toxic and hostile workplace culture causes you serious illnesses. Moved my wife and kid to a different state to help start a business with someone I only met in an interview because he promised me a steady salary. Worked out well for about 9 years and he kept his promises, then another 2 after a 1-year hiatus. No longer working with him and he owes me about $20,000 in back pay. But hey, the first decade was a hell of a ride. Having a poo while there are only a few squares of toilet roll left. You never know when you're going to get an extra sloppy one. I kissed my crush at a Christmas party as part of a magic trick, because we were both too scared to tell each other we liked each other. We'd been good friends for a couple years but neither wanted to ruin the friendship by shooting our shots. It worked. He married me 2 years later. I had just turned 20 and was laying in bed with my girlfriend of 4 months who had just turned 19 when I got the bright idea to ask her to marry me. Almost 23 years later and she's taking a nap while I lay next to her playing on my phone. I definitely made the right call that night. Quitting my job without another one lined up. I've actually done it twice. Each time it lead me to something better or set me on a path to something better. Right now I'm in a pretty good job. I enjoy that as a 5-minute walk from home. I'm also possibly going to be able to get a promotion that will either help me pay off the mortgage 10 years early or only work 3 days a week. I decided to quit my job, sell all my possessions, and sublet my app over the course of 2 weeks from when I made the decision so I could drive across the country and return to live in a larger city. That was 7 years ago and my creative practice has flourished in said larger city since then. Quit my job, sold almost everything I owned and emigrated to the US to marry a girl I'd only known less than 12 months. All worked out, we'll be married 21 years in November. Knowing I would need to retake class for my IT engineering year, I decided that fuck it, I'd do a 3-month formation to have a paper saying I can do shit where I slept from beginning to end and aced the final group project by myself because fuck group project, and tried to look for a job. It didn't go well. It was hard to find a job in IT since every company wanted an engineer mastering tens of language for an intern's salary. So I'm currently reconverting into formation. But I think deciding to drop those expensive educations that lead me nowhere instead of wasting years of my life was the good decision nonetheless. Delivered a speech defending aspects of eugenics to a professor whose child had Downs. I defended the idea of removing genetic issues from the gene pool. I also totally stressed the fact that it would be impossible to actually have a eugenics program that wouldn't be harnessed to various agendas that would make it a horrible thing to try. This was back in the 90s, some gene mod and screening was pretty basic, but I pointed out it would become the new eugenics if we aren't careful. Professor said, I was going to fail you as soon as you opened your mouth, but, somehow, you never crossed the line. Every time I thought you were going to, you somehow avoided it. Got me an A+. Bought No Man's Sky on launch day. Edit. Don't get me wrong, the game has become something amazing, but just knowing that if I'd waited 2 weeks I could have got it at 5 below still haunts me to this day. Growing weed when one of the roommates called the cops on our roommate, landlord, for taking his prescribed medication. So far so good. 4 out of the 5 people living here are also invested in getting free weed, so he's been made very aware that if he goes anywhere near the locked room that bad things will happen. He has no idea what in there, but I'm sure he suspects something, and the cops aren't listening to him anymore since the last time he called it was just someone taking completely legal life-saving medication prescribed by a doctor. He's only gonna be here for another month because the guy who owns the house wasn't too happy about getting his medication stolen and returned by the cops. He is pretty happy about free weed though. I had sex with one of my supervisors we were both into and I blew inside her. After the fact the oh shit moment hits. She tells don't worry I'm fixed after my 3rd kid few elmao. I was 26, there was an opening in New Brunswick in my company. Didn't know the area, had never been but decided in 2 hours that I was going to take it. It was a trying period in my life, took me 5 days to drive there in March. Drove into the province during one of the worst blizzards they'd had in 20 years. Thankfully my little car was loaded down with stuff and I white-knuckled it to town and the hotel. This was in 1996, long before I ever had a cell phone. I was a young woman, applying for student loans in an effort to upgrade my skills for more professional work. Guess how well that went?